Hey, everybody, Lieutenant Joe here. So, what's big in the world right now? What's important for people who are under stress, specifically our first responders? But look at all of us. We are all under stress in today's world, right? With what's going on out there. It's horrific, the things that are happening. So, as you all know, I teach and train police officers and school people and business people. And as I'm looking across the world, I'm saying that the whole idea of wellness is a new concept now that we're all talking about. Everybody's wellness for this and wellness for life. And the more I looked into it, the more I found it is legitimate. We know in law enforcement, the number one job usually of people who kill themselves, either during their career or afterwards, is law enforcement. And after that, it's dentists, usually, which I don't get the connection, but that's usually how it goes. So as I started reaching out into the world to try and find people that could talk about this and kind of give us some information on what this is all about, I found my guest right here, Mr. Butch Stevenson. Butch will give you his background, but he's retired law enforcement, and I've known him for quite a while. He is a professional. He has a heart of gold, and he believes in this, and that's what I think is important. You know, I know a lot of people have a tendency to hear wellness and think, oh, some other touchy-feely mush and this and that. But the reality is, we're learning more and more about the stressors of life, and these things are important to understand, because if we don't understand them correctly and deal with them, it can lead to tragic results in people's lives. So without any further ado, Butch, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Great to see you.
You too, my friend. So listen, you and I were talking about this a while ago. Excuse me one second. I don't mean to
No, do
stop
what you
what
gotta
I'm
do.
doing here, but um, what I want to talk about is the concept of what wellness is. But first, tell everybody who you are. Let me hear about your career and what brought you to this point that you're an expert here.
My career when I started in law enforcement actually when I was 18. It was never a desire to be in law enforcement. It was just going to be a summer job that I realized I enjoyed when I went to the police academy. So from there, I just moved on. Eventually, I started moving on from dispatcher to special officer to eventually on the road. After being laid off from my one agency because they got rid of the police department, I found my spot at the Monmouth County Sheriff's Office. And while I was there, I ended my last 7 years in training and accreditation. Uh, and I had spent 15 plus years as an instructor at the police academy and, developing other programs to deliver for in-service. So during all that, I started going to some of the trainings for resiliency. And eventually, what really got me into is helping more and more was I was back, it'll be 11 years, September 5th, when I got a phone call from my sister that she and my mother had found my other sister had died by suicide, and they found her.
Very sorry.
And
I know
she
that.
always had her issues, we knew it, but I mean, not that it, I didn't know it was a problem. Obviously, I've always known it was a problem, but that's when it really hit home. And sometimes you need that. And in law enforcement, as you know, it's you might not know somebody directly that has done that to themselves on the job, but we know someone who knows someone. So it's so prevalent. And my goal, once that started happening, and they saw what I was doing and the programs I was doing on the outside, the sheriff's office, my sergeant at the time, the sheriff, were all aboard my under sheriff on sending me to different trainings, and eventually going to Valor for Blue training, and then moving on. I ended up I was a founding member of a law enforcement suicide prevention task force at Monmouth University with the School of Social Work. And it culminated with, before I retired, I went to became the resiliency program officer, which was a new concept in New Jersey that's taken off, and became a master resiliency trainer. And that was a program that was developed and spearheaded by a few local agencies in Burlington County, the Burlington County Prosecutor's Office and Department of Criminal Justice. And we went to our first training for it, and it was live streamed around the country because we were the first state to do it that required law enforcement to receive his training. So that got me on board. And I started doing presentations all throughout that time for various um, community organizations, uh, service organizations, youth organizations. And I worked with the Society of Prevention of Teen Suicide, the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, and not just doing presentations, but also promoting them and setting them up.
That's
So that's where it got me. It's my goal is, and when people ask me why I do it, and oh, can you really make a lot of money on it? It's not about making the money on it. If I can help one parent or one sibling to go through what I saw my parents go through or what I went through, then I'm fine with it. I know that's what I'm here for. That's what I do for.
and Butch, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Your heart is in this. I didn't know about your sister.
Yeah,
And I can imagine how painful that is. And you're right. When you talk about, we all know somebody either, or we know somebody, somebody. Every time I teach a class, I say, and I get into this and I talk about some suicide events. And I say, does anybody know anybody's killed themselves? And every class, somebody raises their hands, and it's either it was a family member or another officer or somebody. And I know in my life, there are 3 officers I know that I knew personally that killed themselves.
yeah,
And it's not something you would see coming necessarily, and it's shocking when it comes afterwards. So I think what you're doing is amazing. So the caveat I want to put out there is that because I've known Butch for so long, and I found out recently that he was doing this, I said, listen, this is important, right? I get it. I get it. Not everybody does, but like you said, New Jersey's now making everybody do it, which I think is fantastic. We're trying to solve this problem
yeah,
of officers killing themselves, and anybody, who just don't get this kind of suffering mentally that people will cause them to do this. That I said, hey, can you make a class out of this that our company can put out there? And Butch is doing that. So hopefully this upcoming fall, we're going to be able to put out his class, and he can maybe save some lives. That's one of the things that's always important that we're trying to do is save people's lives. So first of all, I want to thank you, Butch, for being somebody who's involved in that. As somebody who went through a law enforcement career, and I still deal with these cops, it's great that there's people like you out there that do that. Now, one thing when I heard you talking, you talked about the Monmouth County Sheriff's Office, and
yeah.
that's run by Sheriff Sean Golden. Now, I know
Yes.
Sean for a long time. He was a patrol officer, went around, became an elected official, and he's now been the Monmouth County Sheriff. He is an absolutely amazing individual. He really is. You talk about, there's a lot of people that say they can do things and lead, and then there's somebody who really can. Not only that, he's an administrator, just absolutely amazing.
He follows through on what he says.
That's right. He says he's going to do something, and he does it, and he cares about his people. Um, I got a phone call out of the blue one day, and he says, "Hey Joe, why don't you come down to the sheriff's office, and I want to show you around the new place because he built this amazing facility."
Oh, the headquarters is amazing.
Yeah, and it is, and I knew Sean. I had met him multiple times, but we were not like buddies. But for him to call me up, and I said, why are you calling me? He goes, well, you're a training guy, and you're out there in the world, and you're writing, and I wanted you to come and see this. So I said, I came and took the tour, and to a person, they love this guy. The cops, the clerical, everybody, they love this guy, and the facility was amazing. So for him to open that door for you, to get you trained so that you can do that, I got to give him his kudos because, like you said, he's a guy that follows through. He's got vision for the future. I just couldn't be more impressed with him, and I just want to make sure I
Yeah.
said that when you brought that
No,
up.
and when it was brought up that I start doing some of these classes, my sergeant, who just retired as a captain, but when she started bringing it up, maybe you should start looking at some of these classes, and it was brought up through Under Sheriff Donovan and Under Sheriff Breckenridge up to the sheriff. He was all aboard right away. He understands the importance. I mean, aside from being a police officer, he was a paramedic for 20 plus years,
Yeah.
so he understands the stressors of life and the job.
I think that's great. Now you mentioned, Daryl Breckenridge, who is my academy buddy, awesome individual, and Mickey Donovan, again, another tremendous law enforcement guy involved with the sheriff's department. All right, so listen, why don't we set the stage here for people who don't understand what's the whole concept of wellness, right? That's what you're dealing with.
All right. So
What is that about?
wellness falls into under resiliency. So the problem, program that was designed in New Jersey was developed from the military. 'Cause obviously, the military was having problems with soldiers coming back or service members coming back from all over the world. And so they developed a resiliency program. Not so much, it's a suicide prevention program, but it's also a resiliency that will teach you um, how to deal with your stressors. And that's what resiliency is. It's the ability to overcome and deal with your stressors and how to use it to maybe grow because of it. So that's where the concept started coming from. At Monmouth University, we were part of it. The group we developed there, we were part of. It wasn't like we were trying to reinvent the wheel. We know there was programs out there to help, and there's been programs for years. New Jersey also at the forefront with 186 Cop to Cop, which is an amazing organization. And our thing was police weren't using it. We have these programs out there. Why aren't police using it? And why aren't they? And we found that, we sent out surveys and we started finding out it's like, you could probably answer the question right now. Cops see it as you would see it as a weakness. They would see it as a weakness, or what used to be told, the old mindset: suck it up, deal with it. But the thing was, and while I was developing the program and going through the different classes, suck it up isn't wrong. It isn't. We just have to learn how to suck it up, and that's how we have to learn. So the resiliency, what it does is it works on a mindset. You can't have a fixed mindset for it. You have to be willing to change. Um, not everybody's open to that. Like I said, old school mentality. So once you develop a growth mindset, that's when you can really start learning resiliency, because not everybody knows it, and I didn't know it. So, uh, the main reason why it's important, like I said, is to overcome your stressors. And the first time I ever had to talk to somebody about something, I was ordered to when I worked for the Interlaken Police, and one of the neighboring towns had a person that had an incident with a wood chipper, we'll say, and didn't survive. And they called us all in to talk to a stress management team. And that's when it first started hitting me about how to deal with stressors. And, all right, I dealt with it. So basically, with the program that I'm doing, it goes over, what resiliency is, why we need it. I mean, we do need it. It's like I said, it's not just about the job. I mean,
Right.
look, I mean, first responders. I mean, emergency preparedness workers, nurses, doctors, construction workers that are working at sites like Ground Zero or other organizations. We see things that, not to get religious here, but God didn't create people to see.
Right.
You
And
know,
that's an important point. I mean to cut you off here.
yeah,
As you're talking, though, you're bringing some things that I think all of us can think about and come to a realization that these things are in our lives, right? And I think that was a perfect thing. God didn't mean us to see this. The first article that I ever wrote, I always want to be a writer. I want to write, I want to write, I want to write. I just had this in me that I felt like I needed to express myself, right? So the first thing I wrote, I knew an officer that two officers that killed themselves, and I was close with these people, and it shocked me. I mean, it's like I never had those kind of thoughts. But I wrote this article called "The Tragic Toll of Police Work," and I sent it in cold to the FBI magazine. Um, Next thing I know, we get a call back from the editor. Hey, this is great. We're going to publish this in our worldwide magazine. Now, you talk about being like amazed, like, okay, well, I thought that was amazing until I started getting emails from people across the world whose family members were in law enforcement. My mother killed herself, my father killed himself, my brother
yeah,
killed. It was overwhelming to me to realize that there's such underpinning for this kind of thing, right? And over the course of my career, I've been to a bunch of traumatic scenes where I started to realize very clearly that the things we see in law enforcement, especially, and the military, are so overwhelming and not God intended for you to see. You see the horrors of what people do to each
yeah,
other. It was like a cancer. And I could see some people being affected by seeing these horrible things. And I started to realize that that cancer builds up and up and up because what do we do? You talked about, buck up, but we make jokes about it because we're trying to relieve that stress. And if real people that were not law enforcement ever went to a crime scene and they heard the things that cops were saying, they would think we're crazy or sick people. But I started to realize that the jokes people were making were really just a way to deal with what they're looking at.
Dark humor.
Um,
It's a way to
it's
get everything
gallows
out.
humor. That's what it's called. It's been that way
Yeah.
forever, you know. And this is an important thing for all of us to kind of recognize. And what I saw over these years, the examples were amazing. I remember I was a detective and I got called out to, there was a local kid in the neighborhood and he was a little bit slow. But his thing was he liked to drink and he liked to go to the Hooters place and look at the girls. And he would spend his whole paycheck, like every day. He would go over there whenever he got paid, he could spend all his money. And one night he's riding his bicycle home and he's going between two parts of a strip mall. He hits a speed bump and he goes down, bangs his skull, cracks his skull, and dies right there. You know, you talk about a pitiful kind of guy, right? So I get there, the detective, the patrolmen get there, and they call me out, and I come up on the scene, and there's this veteran, dusty old dude patrol officer who was very experienced. He was a very, very good cop, and two younger patrol officer. And I show up, and he goes, "Here you go, detective. Look who we got here." And I looked, and I realized what happened. You could see the beer bottle and how he hit his head and all that. So the first thing that I did, for me as a human being in that instance, even though this guy was an ne'er-do-well kind of guy, um, I said a prayer for him. You know, I'm a Catholic, so I crossed myself and I said a prayer. And this dusty old dude looks at me and goes, "You're saying a prayer for him?" And that just shocked me. Like I wasn't used to that kind of and I said, "Dude, that might be the only prayer this guy ever gets in his life. His mother just lost a son. His brothers and sisters lost their brother and sister. I'm saying a prayer." With that, the two young guys that were standing there next to me, they crossed themselves and they prayed. And he looked and he goes, "Oh, now I got three of yous." Right. And that was a defining moment for me because I talked to the two young guys later on and I said, you know, I know you saw that whole thing with this senior, you know, referent kind of guy standing there, but why did you cross yourself? And they said, "Well, we agreed with you. We thought it was the right thing, but it's kind of hard to do in front of this senior guy." And that, I think, opened my eyes to this whole thing that we do not recognize the pains and the traumas we see and put them in the right place. Because if not, they will last with you forever. They build
Yeah.
up and build up and build up. And then our people kill themselves.
And it'll kill you. And you're never going to know when it's going to happen. Very rarely do we know. Like, and how often do we hear of somebody that does it? And you're like, I didn't know. Wow. I mean, they didn't show any signs.
Right.
No. I mean, to go, I mean, Robin Williams, who saw that coming? You know,
Yeah.
you don't know. And you have to understand what people don't realize when it comes to suicide is that so the state PBA, they have Dr. Steph and Dr. Pizarro who run staff. They're psychologists. And at the time when my sister died, I was working for the state park police. And uh, my old delegate from when I was with the Interlake and Asbury PBA, Gene Dello, at a PBA meeting, state PBA meeting, goes, "Hey, have you talked to Dr. Steph?" And I said, "No." Because you really talk to Dr. Steph. And I was honestly, I was angry at that point. I was angry at my sister. How can you do that? You know, um, I was just, you know, how can you do it to my parents, to my nieces, to my daughter, my nephews? So anyway, I talked to Dr. Steph, and one thing I realized is when people kill themselves, a lot of time they see it as a selfless act. They see themselves as a burden because of all their stress, and maybe they're bringing people down, and maybe they're causing issues. That's why they do it, and it's because the stuff's building up inside, and they don't know how to deal with it. So they think they're kind of giving their stressors to other people, and they want to stop it. And that's why this is so important to learn how to do this, so you can, you know, use mindfulness to clear your head, to overcome things, how to build a resiliency mindset.
Right. I agree. And I'm going to say to anybody out there that's listening, this can be you, this can be father, mother, son, daughter, cousin, somebody. If you see that people are under stress, we have to do something. We have to reach out. Now, there's a very famous guy who tried to kill himself by stepping off the bridge in San Francisco, the Golden Gate. Very famous place for killing yourself. My wife's good friend, her husband, stepped off the Golden Gate Bridge and killed himself many years ago. And we're told that the reason people use that bridge is because when the fog comes in, you can't see anything. You just step off the bridge and off into eternity you go. You know, there's that impact instant I guess there's some pain, but then you're gone. And this young man was stressed out and decided that ending his life was the right thing to end his pain or whatever. And he jumped off and he survived. And he goes around now, he's on the internet. You can look him up, guy who survived suicide on the Golden Gate Bridge. And basically, what he says now is that he had so much pain and so much baggage that this was the only answer for him. And he got up on there and he was glad that he was going to clear it out of his head. He couldn't deal with it no more. And he stepped off and he said, the very second that I stepped off,
You regretted it.
I regretted it and I couldn't believe I did it. And I think in that lesson for all of us is to understand that if someone is feeling suicidal, having suicidal ideations, thinking about it, you can save them or help them save themselves if you can intervene and get them help before they do it, right? Because I guess, putting a gun in your mouth, there's no regrets afterwards. You pull the trigger and you're gone. But this young man's point was the minute I stepped off, I wish I hadn't done it. So there are things that can help.
And
Intervention, what you're
there,
teaching is important.
I don't know if it was him or another person that survived, but they said or it might have been one of the New Yorkers, but they said all they were doing, they stood there for 2 hours and they were waiting for somebody just to smile at them to show that there was somebody else good. And not one person did it. And they jumped and they survived. And that's one of the things we go over in the program are ways you can show your gratitude, and one of them is just saying hi or being a good person, smiling at someone because you never know what that person's going through.
Right.
So,
And I connect that, I connect that and I look and I say, when someone is feeling suicidal, I teach a crisis intervention course. And part of that is understanding that when people are in crisis, they do not think like a clear-minded person.
no, not irrational. Nothing
They're not
irrational.
rational. They're seeing, death is better than going on. And believe me, we understand people have some very difficult circumstances in their life. Life is not easy for everybody, and there's pains, losing people and all that kind of thing. People who suffer a trauma. We just see recently in England, some guy went on a playground and stabbed a bunch of kids, killing 3 little 6-year-old girls. Those parents, that's going to be very, very difficult for them. I think about our own area here, and I don't like to mention names of that, but there was a big case here where a local baseball coach was accused of molesting some boys from the time they were young till the time they got to high school. And one boy finally came forward when it was bothering him so much, and that got out in the community. And it was a very high-end community. Everybody knew each other, and half the people were angry with the boy for saying this because they loved the baseball coach,
Yeah.
and the other half were incensed because this baseball coach would do this. And what we saw come out of that was what they call a suicide cluster of teenagers. This is a real thing that
Yeah.
happened.
Oh, it does.
The boy couldn't handle it after a while, and he jumped in front of a train and he killed himself, and it's tragic. Well, a couple months later, a bunch of other boys had come forward and said it happened to them. Another boy killed himself. And then it wasn't a couple of months after that that another boy, and then finally they realized we have to stop this. There's 6 or 7 boys that came forward. We have got to intervene here because this is a suicide cluster. So young people are susceptible to that. So if that's going on in your community, you see that happening, there is a danger there, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. 100%. And so you bring that up. So I was doing work with the Society Prevention of Teen Suicide. I did some grief training with them where I would at a high school, and the clinical director there, Susan Talone, she was in mental health forever, and she wanted to get out. She's like, you know what? She was a nurse, so she became a school nurse for school, and because she wanted out of the mental health thing, figured I'll work with kids. Well, it turned out that school had a suicide cluster start happening, and it went boom, boom, and it's like, and they found because of how susceptible one person does. Okay, well then the next one does it. Oh my God, I can't believe my friend just did that, and my other friend just did that. So now it's just it's like bowling pins, and I hate to use an analogy like that, but that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
So if you start seeing something where kids are having it, I mean, like I said, the mindset of suck it up is fine, but you got to teach them how to suck it up. And
Yeah.
when it when someone comes forward with, God forbid, something like you were just talking about, I'm pretty sure I know which instant you were talking about. I remember that going on. Uh, you know, whether you're mad at the kid or not, because you love the coach. You know, I would never lay blame on somebody. But you pretty much help push that kid to where he was at by accusing of being mad at or just going off about him.
Right.
You know,
You can see the ripple effects, right? That was between the kids, and thank God they intervened and stopped the other boys from hurting themselves. But what was terrible was that the first boy who killed himself, a year later, his father committed suicide from the stress of dealing with everything that was going on and his son killing himself. And you'd have to say that that mom was then at great risk. And I know there was intervention for her to help her
yeah.
out. But when we look at these kind of things, when I do the crisis intervention class and I said people don't, they're not in their right mind. They're thinking this is the right thing. And you have to be really careful. So some of the things that you might see is if somebody starts giving away their property, says, hey, listen, I want you to have my baseball card collection, or you can have my motorcycle. And you say, what are you talking about? No, I want you to have it. You're a good friend, Butch. You take it. Well, the reason people do that sometimes is because they realize they don't need these things.
Yes.
Um, and I often hear from lots of people, school people especially, and I've seen it with law enforcement. And I ask this question all the time. If somebody is saying things that make you think they're considering suicide, should you ask them if they are thinking of killing themselves? And 99% of people say, no, no, I would never say that.
No,
I
you
would
have to.
say something else. And I say, why? Because they say, well, I don't want to give them the idea. And I say, you got to understand, people that are considering killing themselves have already thought about it. You're
And
not going to give them an idea.
no, no, and that's the thing. And if you bring that up, and that's one of the things that is brought up, and the teen suicide prevention program through the SPTS, they bring up that you're not going to put it in their head if it's there. It's like they know it's an option, but they never thought of it. So if you ask them, they say no, of course not, but not saying they're going to admit to it either. But you're not putting it. So you need to ask that question,
Right.
and that's a big thing. And when, like I said, when my sister died, it wasn't out of the realm of possibility. We didn't think it was going to happen, but she'd had her issues. So, and you brought up about giving away things. So my sister was on medications, and my mom and I had talked the day before saying she hadn't heard from my sister in a day and a half. My mom would give her medications. And my sister was 42 when she took her life. And I said, well, maybe she's doing her thing. And then they found her, and talking to the prosecutor's office, they were great. And the one guy said, listen, I don't want you to sit there and say, not my sister. We all know how she died. She died by an overdose. He goes, could have been accidental, possibly. Do I think it was? And he said, no, I don't. I can't prove it. But let's look at all the factors. And after all the interviews and everything, my sister was a medical professional that did deal with medication. So she knew what was whatever. They said the amount of heroin in her system was so high, there was no way she was going to survive. There was no way, and she knew it. And she hadn't used for quite some time. But talking to her friends, they had caught her that day, so they've never seen her so happy. That's one of the other signs.
Ah, you're absolutely
Then
right.
when
And
my
why is that? Why does somebody who is talking
because they
about
finally
suicide?
came to terms with what they're going to do, they're going to be at peace,
Yes.
and they're all right. So they're at where they're at. And then when they found my sister, my mom and my other sister found her. She was sitting in front of a collection of pictures of my daughter, my nieces and nephew, her five favorite people in the world. And she was there in her last moments were looking at her five favorite people,
Right.
you
So,
know, the people she was living
in
for.
the tragedy of losing your sister, there are lessons for people to learn who are
Yeah.
listening and watching. What's going on here is that you're right, and that's one of the things that I tell people when you're talking to someone, and they're down and they're down, and you hear that suicide, and then maybe you talk to them for a long time as a crisis intervention person, and then you might hear a change in their tone, because I kid, it's this. If anybody's ever gotten engaged, you probably think over that a lot. It's a lot of stress. Am I going to do it? Or getting a mortgage or any big decision in life,
Yeah.
fret over it. until you finally make the decision, and then that weight comes off. And I think people who are on the suicide path, you're right. They're trying to figure out what they want to do. When they finally decide, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get my peace, it'll be over, the pain will be over. There is that change in attitude, and that's a key sign. So people have to go to the hospital when they sound like that. When I was a school security director, and kids were doing, drawing and writing and saying crazy things that looked dangerous. I was called in for an interview with the kid, and I remember this one boy, freshman boy, had drawn this picture of people getting shot and killed, and a picture of somebody in the middle laying there dead. And I was talking to him, and he said that was him. After he killed all those people, he was going to kill himself.
Wow.
And then he started crying, and I said, "How long have you been thinking about killing yourself?" And he says, "For a while." And the principal stood up and said, "Can I talk to you in the hallway?" I came out in the hallway. He says, "You can't ask a kid if he's been trying to kill himself or thinking about." I said, "What are you talking about? We have to get to that." And finally he calmed down. We went back in. I said, "Who else have you told anybody you were thinking of killing yourself?" And he's crying. He goes, "Yeah, I told my mom." And I said, "When?" He goes, "I told her yesterday." I said, "What did your mom say?" Mom said, "Knock that nonsense off," because people don't want to believe that someone's going to, you're not going to kill yourself. Stop it. You're just having a bad day. And if somebody talks suicide, you have got to intervene. You've got to get them some help.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and uh, there's multiple places to do that, and how to get people help. Obviously, if it's immediate 911, you have to call 911, get the help. Um, and if you're in law enforcement in New Jersey, you have Cop to Cop, which is a phenomenal organization. It's retired cops. It's law enforcement people understand the job that you can talk to. Um, and then I thought, which was great, the suicide prevention hotline, the national one, used to be a 1-800 number, and I couldn't give you what it was. It was just so long.
Mhm.
But the federal government changed it, and this was a game changer. It's now 988,
Yeah,
and it's completely anonymous. It's not only talk, but it's also you can text if you have an issue,
that's awesome.
and you can call for somebody else.
Well, Butch, I think I'm gonna change gears here for a little bit while I got you.
Yeah.
Um, if somebody wanted to reach out and find out more about this wellness, you can go to my website, pangaratraining.com. It'll
Yeah.
be all up there once the course is up, the description, everything. But if somebody wanted to reach out to you or get more information, how would they reach out to you?
So my website's being developed right now, but I do have a Facebook page. It's my the company I use is Riptide Training and Consulting. My email address for the company is Riptide T and C at gmail.com. Or if you can find me on social media or LinkedIn, um, just send me a private message. Uh, Hopefully, my website will be done by the end of the summer, and really get that moving. But those are probably the best ways to get a hold of me.
That's outstanding. All right. We're going to change gears. We're going to take a little break for a minute, and then we'll be back with more. Some interesting stuff. We're going to talk about maybe how the current state of law enforcement can lead people to not making the best decisions. We know that recruiting is down, everything's down. People don't want to be a cop anymore. Um, but that can also cause a lot of problems. So we'll be back in a few minutes.